Hello and welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. The debate continues over U.S. strategy in Afghanistan, in speeches, newspapers, and Sunday talk shows. And that's just among administration officials. This week, the president has more meetings with his divided war council. On health care reform, Obama must also manage his allies. Congress is moving forward, but can the president forge agreement between liberals and moderate Democrats? To discuss all of this, plus the latest developments in Iran, I'm joined by CBS News Washington Bureau Chief Chris Isham and CBS News political consultant Marc Ambinder. Chris, I want to start with you. Something that Jim Jones, National Security Advisor, said yesterday on Face the Nation. Let's take a look at that.
You think it follows that if the Taliban comes back, that al-Qaeda will be back?
Yeah, that's a hypothetical that I just, it just depends on the circumstances.
That's a hypothetical. That hypothetical has been at the center of the Afghan campaign. And not only that, it was at the center of the president's VFW speech in August, in which he said, if the Taliban comes back in, so too will al-Qaeda. What's going on here?
Well, I must say it was a fairly stunning comment, and certainly it was not hypothetical in 2001 when we went into Afghanistan initially to expel al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was all over the country. Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are lashed up at many, many levels, including intermarried. They've married into each other's families. They are dependent on each other in many ways, tactically, strategically. They have the same world view, the same fundamentalist view of the world. The argument from the administration is that the Taliban are more focused on Afghanistan and al-Qaeda is more focused on the world. And America, that's probably true, but in every other respect, they're very, very tightly lashed up. And I think to say it's hypothetical is wishful thinking.
What do you think Jones is doing here, Marc?
Well, I think Jones is, in a sense, trying to be a general who is rebutting the position of the general who is on the ground, to try and give the Obama position here, which is, let's just rethink this. Let's perhaps try a different strategy. Perhaps we can't win with a counterinsurgency strategy, to try and give it some credibility. Because right now, quite frankly, General McChrystal, the commander on the ground in Afghanistan, pretty much has all the cards, and the White House looks weak, in part because the White House invested General McChrystal with his powers. And I think Jones is trying to give the White House a little bit of leverage in terms of public opinion. I don't think he was very successful yesterday.
Chris, another thing he said yesterday was that he would prefer it if McChrystal would go through the chain of command. A little bit of a shot across the bow. McChrystal's been talking. But didn't McChrystal basically get the White House's attention by talking out loud? And isn't that something he should probably do if he wants to make his case?
I think that's right. I think that the other thing that struck me yesterday about the comments of General Jones was that he referred to the assessment by Stan McChrystal as being his opinion of his role within the strategy. So that's putting some pretty clear separation between the White House and General McChrystal. So they're clearly feeling very sensitive about this at the moment. And when McChrystal went public the other day in London at the think tank, the Institute for International Strategic Studies, and basically came down very hard against the so-called Biden plan, which is a limited counter-terrorist operation and downsizing troops, I think that that clearly annoyed them.
Marc, I want to ask you a little bit of an inside baseball question,
Sure.
which is there was a 3-hour meeting last week. The President's War Council met in the Situation Room. The next day, or the day, 2 days later in the Washington Post, a piece appears in which you have lots of unnamed sources who were in that meeting talking about how McChrystal's assumptions were exposed to sunlight. They were called myths. This is kind of extraordinary, isn't it, to have this kind of back and forth in public about a key national security decision? It's certainly different than the Bush administration.
You know, it reminds me of similar debates that were sort of played out in public, but on these background levels in conversations between White House officials and journalists. For example, about the Marshall Plan after World War II. I'm reading this wonderful book, The Hawk and the Dove, about sort of development of these two schools of foreign policy thought. But it reflects also, I think, a desire by the White House to keep President Obama himself above this particular debate, while, again, equalizing perhaps the two sides, because people perceive McChrystal's view right now, because, again, Obama asked McChrystal for his view, and Obama insinuated, he said, during the campaign that he would listen to the generals. This was one of his big campaign lines. Not only was Afghanistan the right war, but he would listen to his generals, not necessarily do everything they said, but he would give them the weight of the record. It would give them their recommendation significant amount of weight. So I think this is an effort by the White House to equalize the playing field a little bit, but keep the president himself out of it, which is why the president yet hasn't made a big speech about this.
I tell you one thing just to add to that is really troubling some of our allies in Europe and also in the area in South Asia and Afghanistan and Pakistan is they see this debate. They're hearing the debate, and what they're worried about is that America will once again do what it's done in the past, which is lose its resolve and not have the stomach to carry through with the fight and do what's necessary. So they're getting very, very concerned about the direction of this debate and the waffling that they see is going on in Washington.
Quick wrap-up question on Afghanistan, given what the allies are thinking, and Marc, the domestic pressure on this. How much pressure is the president getting to go one way or the other from his own party, and how much is he thinking about that?
He's getting a significant amount of pressure, although I think there's a sense among particularly the more savvy Democrats in the House and the Senate who have participated in these types of debates for years that although they're willing, like there have been a couple, like Senator Feingold, who have said, let's just take our troops out of Afghanistan, people are still kind of sitting on their hands. I think the sense is give the president the benefit of the doubt, but do enough to ensure that the domestic constituencies that are doubtful about Afghanistan are being heard and being fed. But you're beginning to see a bit of a split. I mean, you saw yesterday Senator Carl Levin and Senator Ike Skelton, Congressman Ike Skelton, both both influential members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee, respectively, House Armed Services Committee, respectively, essentially say that if the president requests more troops, he'll get them.
Right. Although the president's also gotten a letter from progressives saying...
He's also gotten a letter from right, but these are the same progressives who have been, who have opposed every war supplemental appropriation. Although this White House has promised no more supplementals. So the question remains, how are you going to fund this outside the budget process, which is the only way to get troops there quickly?
Right.
So that's a big question.
Chris, I want to pivot to Iran. Yesterday, the New York Times reported that the UN thinks Iran has the know-how to build a nuclear weapon. Why is that significant?
Well, it's significant, in particular, since the last official assessment we had of the Iranian program was in 2007, by the CIA, the National Intelligence Estimate, which said that, in their view, that Iran had suspended all of its work on nuclear weapons back in 2003. So this would indicate that they're continuing to do research on weapons design, weapons fabrication, and may have progressed beyond the research phase, but at a minimum, they have acquired the know-how to build a weapon. Of course, that has always been the least difficult obstacle in acquiring a weapons capability. The more difficult part is acquiring the highly enriched uranium, which is the primary focus of the Iranian program, and where we are today. And the negotiations last Thursday focused on that in Geneva.
And Iran has said they will allow inspectors to come in on the 24th, a week later than the U.S. wanted. Why is that significant? Is this gamesmanship? What's your take on the posture from Iran?
Well, the problem with Iran is that they have done this before, and we've been down this road before with Iran, and they're very good when they see sanctions on the horizon. I think last week we were talking about this. They were under pressure because they felt the Russians had come out and said, Medvedev had come out and said that sanctions might be inevitable. That was a real signal to the Iranians that they better start to change their tune, which they did. And they basically have come up with a strategy here to allow the IAEA inspectors into the country to take a look at this new secret enrichment plant. And then also they talked about shipping off some of their low-enriched uranium to Russia or a third country to be enriched further so that it could be provided as fuel for the reactor. These, in a way, they're good gestures. It's good that they're letting the inspectors in. It's good that they're thinking about sending that uranium off to Russia or somewhere else. That's all good. But it doesn't address the fundamental question, which is that they are still in violation of the UN Security Council resolution, which requests that they stop all their enrichment activities, and that's not addressed.
Right. You can come look at this thing we lied about for a good long time, is the agreement they've made. Marc, I want to ask you about health care quickly, which is the health care bill is moving out of the Senate Finance Committee. That is progress in a slow, grinding congressional way. The president behind the scenes is trying to put together some kind of deal. There's a little news that maybe the public option might be coming back to life in some way. In the Senate, they'd said it had been dead. What's your sense of how things are moving forward?
What the White House is trying to do about the public option is fashion a compromise, particularly in the House, between moderate Democrats, the Blue Dogs, who are very concerned about budget spending and government control over health care, and between liberal Democrats who want a public plan because they want competition. And the essential compromise, and the way the White House is trying to game this, is that the moderates will give up a little bit on the money. In other words, they'll give up on some of the subsidies so that more people will have insurance, and the liberal Democrats will change the way that the public option reimburses doctors to make it a little bit more generous, a little bit more comparable to private rates, and not necessarily tie it to Medicare rates, which would be significantly less than what in theory the rates that all these providers in the market would get. And that's kind of the basics of what the White House is, the compromise they're trying to fashion. But at the same time, what the Senate Finance Committee debate last week showed, and what you're going to see in future debates, is everyone wants to get on the record in favor or against the public option. Once they do that, they'll get to conference, and there's a sense, even among Democrats who are voting against the public option, that they're going to find some compromise. So the White House and Democrats are pretty optimistic that they'll get a bill that they think is pretty good.
They'll get a bill. Everybody will get the cover they need. Talk to me for a moment about timelines. Is there a moment before which this has to happen?
Well, if you want to, part of it is just a procedural question. If they want to try and pass the Senate bill through these budget reconciliation rules, they're almost approaching the end of that, the end of the time period that they can do that, which means that they're probably not going to do it. They're going to need 60 votes in the Senate, or at least 60 votes to initially. Again, one of the things that people don't quite, or hasn't quite seeped into the public consciousness yet, is that you don't need 60 votes to pass. You just need 60 votes to cut off the filibuster. So there may well be Democrats who will vote against the bill, Senate Democrats, but who won't vote to filibuster the bill in the Senate. And I think that's, again, what the White House is trying to engineer. As for time frame, Tom Harkin, the new chairman of the Help Committee, who replaced Ted Kennedy, says, before Christmas, around Hanukkah. So it's going to be a holiday health care reform bill, I guess.
They still have some bumps in the road.
Totally. But they absolutely have bumps in the road. But looking at the trajectory now versus looking at it a month ago, seem to be a fewer bumps. And they seem to be at least picturing a final bill and having a picture of the final bill in mind, which is helpful when they're trying to build a compromise.
An ever greater willingness on the part of the White House to do whatever it takes to get one.
Right.
Marc Ambinder, thanks very much. Chris Isham, thanks very much. Senators have a lot to talk about, and Senator Schumer has more than most. They're bound to repeat themselves, and lately in the healthcare debate, Schumer has been introducing us to his friends Jim and Mary. Here are a couple of times he talks about his hypothetical constituents.
The clear thing is, if we do nothing, tens of millions of people are going to lose coverage in the next decade. Your employer will call you in and say, Jim, Mary, you're doing a great job. I want you to stay with my company forever. But I can't afford health care for you. And here's what's going to happen to you. Your boss is going to call you in 3 years or 5 years, in all too many cases, and say, Jim, Mary, you're a great worker here. You've worked hard, you dedicate yourself to this company or this group, and I love you, and I want you to stay here as long as you can. But I got bad news. I can't afford health care for you anymore, as much as I love your job, the job you do. Or maybe he says, I can afford health care, but it's a new plan, and you have to pay the first $10,000, and your premium goes up. What are we going to say to Jim and Mary when that happens?
Thank you for watching us on Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. Jim, Mary, and everyone else, you can find us here every weekday at 12:30 p.m. on CBSNews.com. Have a great day.